Hi and welcome to the latest edition of the WEA Alliance Engagement Department's video blog for National Alliance leaders. Through these videos we're seeking to create a sense of community amongst those who lead national alliances and to make you aware of resources and ministries that the WEA is embarking upon. In this episode we're introducing a new initiative within the Public Engagement Department of the WEA known as the Migration and Refugee Network. Then I want to highlight some new resources around National Alliance structure and leadership that you might find a useful tool for review amongst your leadership team. And then to wrap things up, we're dropping in on the Evangelical Alliance in Bangladesh. Well, the Alliance Engagement Department exists to serve the more than 140 national alliances that exist around the world as they, in turn, serve the churches and ministries in their respective countries. If there is any way that we can be a support and an encouragement, please do make contact. We'd love to help. The nations of the world today are not always well represented by borders and lines on a map. Cultures, ethnicities are increasingly fluid. Historical territories that one culture identified with are sometimes superseded these days by economic factors, environmental crises, and violent conflict that force migration from a home country to a new country. When Jesus gave his Great Commission to the first generation church, it was that we might make disciples of every ethnic people group in our world. The gospel is transnational and multi-ethnic. But he had more in mind than just nations and nationalism. Right from the beginnings of his dealings with his chosen race, there were special instructions to care for and be kind to those of different ethnicity living amongst God's people. For instance, back in Exodus chapter 22, verse 21, we read these words, "Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt." Or in Leviticus 19, verses 33 and 34, "When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God." Well, the World Evangelical Alliance has recently launched a new initiative within its Public Engagement Department that recognizes this ever-changing demographic around the world. The Migration and Refugee Network is a special task force that's focusing on the gospel response to ever-increasing numbers of people relocating around the world. In some countries, the numbers are quite small, but in other countries, the numbers are vast. So-called foreigners coming to live in our neighborhood. It's a global phenomenon that brings with it a range of challenges and opportunities. The Migration and Refugee Network aims at facilitating a coordinated response from the global to the grassroots level and strengthening the collaboration between various evangelical alliances, agencies and churches that serve the needs of migrants, refugees and those newest and most vulnerable communities. Well, heading up this new ministry is Chris Pulanayagam. Chris, it's great to have the chance to chat with you here. What's the big idea behind the Migration and Refugee Network? Why is this a subject that evangelical Christians ought to care about?
Good question to start off with, and thanks for having me. Evangelicals by nature are people who are mission-oriented, and we have been well known for funding missionaries to go overseas, to go to places that haven't heard the gospel, and very good at creating the funding to send specialized people overseas. But what's happening right now, I think, is that God is bringing those mission opportunities right to our doorstep, in the personhood of people who are on the move, and I think it's a very opportune time for the church to sit up and say, you know what, we don't have to send missionaries overseas as much as we did those days, because the people whom we want to speak to about the gospel are actually coming and living in our neighborhoods. Unfortunately, still in our minds of some of our people in our congregations, we find it easier to slip $100 note in the offering for missions work rather than take a few steps across our fence and speak to the person who just landed from maybe Sudan in our neighborhood. So I think, God just created the opportunity of moving people around the world and giving us the space to talk about Him and to live and breathe the gospel with these people who haven't heard the gospel before. So that's a big reason. I think that, and if we don't take that opportunity, by the horns right now, we would lose. And there are two ways of doing that. We could do that with fear, which will drive us, further into isolation, or we could do that with, hope and say, thank you, God, for bringing people around us with whom we can share the gospel. So I think the church is getting a huge opportunity to evangelize and to spread the gospel this way.
Yeah. I mean, how big an issue is this? I mean, can you give us some statistics on global migration or refugees or the whole sort of diaspora disbursement around the world?
So I think at the end of 2020, around which the right stats are kind of counted, we had about 85 million people on the move, meaning about 24 million of them were people who had, as refugees, left their home country to third countries. And there were about double that amount who were internally displaced people, so people on the move within their own countries. And 85 million is a lot of people to be seeking a better place to live. That's quite apart from the number of migrants on the move who are move more for economic reasons. And that's up to about 275 million. A huge number from what it was 2 years ago. So it just again goes to show how God's moving people or allowing people to move, even through persecution and environmental disasters and all that, so that His ultimate purpose might be achieved, and that is, for people to hear the gospel and respond. So those are numbers. I mean, you can break it down even more, but that's generally speaking, that's how big it is. So if you add 275, 85, you're up to about almost 350 million people. That's more than the population of some countries.
I mean, as a new network within the World Evangelical Alliance, I mean, what are you actually specifically hoping to do?
So we are a network, and by that very nature, we'd like to connect people who are engaged in this work of responding with and responding to refugees and people on the move, and not just only refugees, but migrants as a whole. And so we want to be people who bridge the gap between churches and those who are coming, those people on the move, in ways that are tangible, in ways that we can actually help churches to do that. We want to be connectors, we want to be bridge builders, we want to be able to resource people, and that's the whole idea of the network. We won't be the people who are actually the go-to people. It'll be networks in various regions and churches around the globe. It's a tall order, but we want to get there, slowly and build this network up so that in the end, local churches, local regional alliances will be able to do this work fully equipped and have the capacity to do such work. And that's what I'm hoping, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and let me ask this. Your focus as an international network, are you looking at working primarily with the big players in terms of refugee intake, or what about working with those alliances where the number of refugees is actually relatively small?
So we'll have two kind of foci. One is we'll collaborate with the big players, which means that if work is being done in certain areas in refugee work, we like to collaborate with them. I'm quite against competing or trying to recreate the wheel. Wherever good work is happening, we'll get alongside them and partner and collaborate in ways that we can. But the main focus of our work is going to be with congregations at the local level through regional alliances and regional and national alliances. And the work that we will do with them is resourcing, capacity building, equipping, supporting in any way that we can. Because look at it this way: a lot of the refugee work, especially done in nations, in whole these countries, is done by external agencies sending people into the country. I feel that the work of responding to this people movement is the work of local churches. And if we can strengthen them and give them capacity and build their capacity to do that, whether it means starting from a theological framework first and getting into the operational aspects of it in terms of skills and all of that stuff, I like to do that. So training is going to be and resource is going to be a big part of our work while we collaborate with the big agencies around the world. So.
Yeah, so I guess I take it from that really you're going to be resourcing national alliances around the world to be able to resource the churches and their constituencies. Is that the idea?
Exactly. And we'll be working through them. I mean, and I know some of them have the capacity, some of them don't. So we like to, go in there and find out how can we come alongside to enhance the capacity, right? For instance.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the big issues that migrants face when they come into a new nation?
Speaking as a migrant myself, right, integration is huge. How do you integrate into a culture that is foreign to you? And then within that integration, there's a whole spectrum of issues that I can name, right? Just like getting used to climate, for example, getting used to systems of education. Don't forget that as migrants and refugees, you leave your entire social capital behind and come to a new country. So you've got to build up your social capital again. You might come in as a doctor, but no one knows who on earth you are. So you got to reestablish through, certification process, studying again. And all that has happened while you are trying to get your food for your family on the table and trying to find a house to live in. So there are all those multiple challenges that kind of stack up against you. That's external. Internally, your kids are adapting much faster than you are for a first generation migrant. That introduces problems too in terms of culture in your own home. You've got a culture where kids don't talk back to your parents, but now in these cultures they come back and say they are brave enough to talk back and what do you do, right? So those are some of the real issues people face. There are other issues. I mean, racism. The othering of you. So you come here as a person, maybe of color, and you look different from the neighborhood you live in, and you might be considered the other, even in your own church. And that's why I keep coming back to the church, and I said the church is the best situated place to nullify those challenges and actually help people to integrate much faster. I benefit from coming to a church and being part of a church here, which is really gracious in helping me to establish fast.
An Evangelical Alliance around the world may not have thought much about this, say, but in watching this interview, that they could get quite excited about it. What might an Evangelical Alliance in a given country consider doing to actually minister to migrants and refugees and the growing diaspora community?
Yeah, I think a large portion of it, Brian, is answering the question why. Why must we engage in this work? And that comes back to our theological, frameworks and our foundations. I mean, the Bible is full of examples and exhortations about the other, how you treat the alien, how you treat the person who's foreign. And remember, those were written to tribes who were nomadic tribes anyway. They also were on the move. So when people came to their tents or their vicinity, they were supposed to accept them just as one would accept them themselves. And I think we need to reclaim that the theological understanding of what it means to welcome the stranger. And we are also strangers in this land. No one has been here for millions of years except people who are the indigenous folk, right? So I think there's a lot to be learned in terms of the theology around it, around missions, around accept, welcome the stranger. And like I started off by saying, even our missions, idea of missions is a little skewed. It has got the Western uh, uh, way of looking at missions as sending somebody overseas. But how about looking at missions as going out and helping your neighbor who's from a different place, who's coming from a place where you've sent a missionary, you've funded the person to go to, but actually that person is here now.
Yeah.
And equipping that person to, what does it mean to offer generous hospitality, right? Those things are things that we would like to engage with the National Alliance and say, how can we equip and support your local churches to, for example, understand cultures? How can we give some training in terms of crossing cultural barriers? Even simple things like, you might say, some people in our church never come to church on time. And I can stand that. But if you begin to understand their concept of time as being synchronous and not linear, you might begin to understand that, that's the way some cultures work. So that kind of thing, Brian, mostly equipping and resourcing.
Are we talking about something that's difficult? Is ministry to migrants and refugees particularly specialized, or is it actually something that just about any church could engage in?
It's very simple, but not easy. That's how the simplicity of it is found in the Bible, right? Accept each other, accept the other person just as you would accept one of your own family members. That's the simple part of it. Love your neighbor as yourself, right? It's easy to understand, but it's very difficult to do in practice because in the end, we are human and self-protection kicks in. When you're in my space, I want to protect my space. And how do we encourage and invite churches and congregations to open up that space so that the other can be now us and not them, right? So it's difficult in practice, and I think one of the problem with the difficult part is that a lot of it is driven by fear and the fear of the unknown, and our job is going to be, how do we lessen that fear, the level of fear and discomfort? And I think that's done by giving more information about the person that you are moving to a neighborhood, why they behave the way they do, how that kind of thing. So once you lessen the fear, then love takes over, and love has no barriers. So we like to flip that switch a little.
If a national alliance, perhaps looking at this and wanted to do something amongst the diaspora communities in their nation, how could your network be of help to them, straight off the bat?
So we would have our contact details on our website very soon. On the WS, it'll be easy to find us. There'll be an email address, and they should just reach out to us with anything, because we have connections with those who can offer certain services. So it might not be us who's always kind of giving them the resources. We can point them to resources. We want this to be a partnership. Again, we don't want this to be us and them thing. We want to be working partnership in collaboration with alliances, whether it's national or regional. And we want it to be something that's God glorifying. Ultimately, the kingdom has to be built, right? It's not about us doing our work. It's about engaging God's kingdom. So I would say if anybody wants to contact us, we are contactable. We are very open for business.
Fantastic. I mean, the theological underpinning of what you're doing, I think, is quite obvious and quite profound. God bless you in what you and the Migration and Refugee Network is wanting to do. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and I look forward to seeing how God unfolds this and engages through our national evangelical alliances around the world in this important area. Around the world these days, there are over 140 national evangelical alliances. They seek to serve the Christian churches and ministries within their nation, provoking, resourcing them to preach the gospel, to plant churches, to make disciples, and to speak up on issues of justice and righteousness in their national context. Well, national evangelical alliances, or NEAs, come in all kinds of sizes and shapes. Some are large and employ many staff, others are smaller and are run by volunteers. and how they come into being and the way that they structure themselves can actually be quite varied. So we've done a bit of thinking around this and have produced some written resources that you might like to consider as an NEA leadership team. On the AED website, you'll find a series of papers that discuss issues like, what is an Evangelical Alliance? I mean, why do they exist? What's their purpose? Or how do you go about forming an alliance? What practical steps need to be taken to establish an NEA? Or 10 core principles of leadership and organization. I mean, leadership in God's kingdom is very different to leadership in this world. Or protocols and policies in forming an NEA. Some practical strategies to consider. And then fifthly, what does a healthy National Evangelical Alliance look like? So go to our website and check these out. Maybe you could circulate one or more of these papers amongst your staff and leadership body and, well, work through them as a means of healthy review. And again, if you think that there are ways that we might be able to help you and your alliance develop or go to that next level, please do get in touch. We'd be delighted to do all we can to assist, to train, resource that which God is calling you to do and be.
I am Martha Dash, the General Secretary of National Christian Fellowship of Bangladesh, which is the Evangelical Alliance in Bangladesh. The Evangelical Alliance has started in 1980. Before it was part of World Council of Churches. And then in 1980, they started it with a vision of reaching mostly the ethnic community, that was the target. And now we have 18 church denominations and 29 associate members. We call them parachurch organizations. So those 18s are mostly evangelicals, Pentecostals. Some are Lutheran also, Presbyterian, but we all do believe in evangelism and church planting. And we also have 29 parachurch organizations, and some are like Christian NGOs, and some are like Bible institutions. And those parachurches really come along with the churches to help to propagate and evangelize those church organizations. I have started to serve as a General Secretary from March 2017. So it will be almost 5 years. But I am very much involved with NCFB since 2004. Our discipleship is the core objective now, so we go for discipleship, and our alliance really want to go forward with because we have plenty of people, so we will always target the discipleship, especially with the younger generation, and also the children. We have lots of children and we are overpopulated. So children will be also targeted, disciple them, and so that they can disciple even other children. And women empowerment is also our target, because in Bangladesh we are less educated, and even in the rural areas women are illiterate. So our focus will be even women, so that they can be educated and empowered, and they can come in the ministry. I think this will be our target ministry, our discipleship for the young generations, and discipleship for the children, teenagers, and also to target the women, because they are not literate, they are not empowered, And for the church ministry, we believe that it's not the main focused or main oriented church ministry. We always believe that male and female, if we work together, then we can achieve more. In Bangladesh, at this moment, we have 170 million people, and Christians are very small minority. We have 0.6% Christians, not even 1%, and maybe half of those Christians are still Roman Catholics. So government, when they think about Christians, and they always think about the cardinals and the big bishops and fathers and nuns. So as Protestant or evangelicals, actually our presence and our influence is very, very less and very, very minor. So, but we have freedom in Bangladesh to practice our religion, faith. Although the state religion is Islam, but still we have that opportunity and that freedom that we can practice our own faith without much disturbance. We are much better form than some other Asian countries. But in some places, there are some tensions, and like if not physical assaultation or physical persecution, but there are some mental, and psychological pressure for the Christians. Yes, when we really want to practice our faith and violence, or want to do something that looks bigger, that we have to be careful in those places. Otherwise, we have very, very small minority. So that's the state of Christians in Bangladesh. The major challenges are the churches that our denominations plant. We do not have trained pastors. We may have a small congregation like cell group or home church, and we do not have a church house. That is also another challenge. So the congregation will meet only maybe once in a week for an hour or 1.5 hours. Since we do not have trained pastors, so those who will officiate or conduct the service, they are not trained biblically. They are simple believers. So in that sense, we say the challenge is to disciple the believers and grow in maturity. That is a very big challenge at this moment for Bangladesh. And as I said before, that women are still very behind in education and especially in the ministry. So that will be another challenge, that to really bring the women in a front and educate them and adapt them in the ministry. That is also a very big challenge. And since we do not have trained pastors, the believers, they are not taught to go out and make disciples. Many times believers think that going for evangelism and church planting and sharing the gospel is the work of the pastor. So believers are not taught in that way. That's why the church planting and propagating of the gospel is very less in Bangladesh. So if we can educate people for the ministry, church planting, so that can be an opportunity for Bangladesh. So we have a few Bible school and one college level seminary. So if we can send some young people, especially those who have some kind of calling to the Bible school or Bible colleges per year, then that can bring an opportunity to they can lead the churches. They can be pastor of those churches. So that could be our opportunity.
Well, thanks for joining us in this latest edition of our video blog for National Alliance leaders. May God richly bless you as you fulfill the calling and the opportunities that He's given to you. Together, we're a powerful force for the kingdom of God.